Scheifele.
Western Hockey League, Prince Albert Raider, Joshua Morrissey.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 2026 draft preview show here. Ordinarily, this is the check-in point of view, but please be welcome with Mitchell Clinton and Paul Edmonds, the voice and analyst, respectively, of the Winnipeg Jets on CJOB and Power 97. I'm Jamie Thomas, your host for this 30-minute or so broadcast. Of course, the 2026 NHL Draft is going in Buffalo tomorrow, and of course, on Saturday, the Winnipeg Jets hold the 8th overall draft pick. And before we get into the discussion of the draft, I'll get a quick thought from both of you, starting with Paul. I don't even know if we can go over all the trades that have been made. We're just talking about how this feels like an NBA offseason, but it has not been boring, to say the least. There have been many players, big-name players, changing addresses heading into the National Hockey League draft in Buffalo tomorrow. Paul, just what do you make of the things flying all over the place right now?
Well, it's great if you're a fan because there's been a lot of horse trading, and horse trading is always interesting because it leads to speculation. But I think in all seriousness, you have to look at what's caused this. And what's caused this is there's been a big jump in the salary cap to $104 million. So there's a little bit more risk taking that's going on with general managers in moving some pieces around and trying to better their teams. So there's a lot of, as they say in the stock market, volatility in the market right now, a lot of changing of hands and capital moving along and draft picks and players. So I think it's great. It's certainly allowed for us and programs like ours to talk a little bit more and have some content and fodder for what we're trying to produce and what we're trying to analyze in what's going on. But I do believe that the big reason that we're seeing what we're seeing, certainly this week, has been the ability to spend a little bit more money because you're now at $104 million for your salary cap, which is also going to jump to $113 million next year. So the reins are out a little bit. We're not as tight to the vest on where we are financially in the league. And therefore, there's a little bit more room now for general managers to be able to negotiate deals and move pieces and parts to try to better their teams. And that's what we're seeing because of the increased salary cap.
Yeah, certainly. And lots of teams scrambling now because the Carolina Hurricanes, of course, the Stanley Cup champions. Now it's a copycat league. Teams trying to figure out and get themselves a lot better for what was a pretty dominant performance by the Hurricanes through the Stanley Cup playoffs in 2026. Mitch, have you enjoyed all the movement that we've been seeing over the past few weeks?
I mean, for sure, it's entertaining, kind of like what Paul said, and I've had to do a lot of updating on like various rosters and whatnot, even in the off season here. But I think the thing that's kind of stood out to me a little bit over the course of this is it hasn't necessarily been, I think back to when Kyle Connor signed his extension, right? And he had the 1 year left on his deal. And, a lot of the conversation throughout that off season was kind of like, oh, he's going to go into the last year of his deal. Well, now it's seeming like it's when there's 2 years left, players at that kind of stratosphere are starting to be asked about their futures, and management teams are checking in to make sure, hey, are we, still on the same page when it comes to you resigning in a couple of years, whatever that may be. And now those changes and those conversations seem to be happening a little bit earlier and earlier than I think they ever did, at least in terms of them being publicly reported on, right? So we're starting to see a little bit more of that. And it's kind of made for some interesting conversations from various teams. So, but I mean, I've enjoyed it. I mean, you start looking at some of the moves that have been made. Of course, Brady Tkachuk's the big, probably the headline one, and going down to Florida, being with his brother. And but I mean, just even the last couple of days with everything involving St. Louis, Jordan Kyrou goes out. I mean, that's a guy that, I mean, Paul, you've said Jordan Kyrou's name over and over again in those many battles against the St. Louis Blues. And now to think that that's not going to be there, but Connor McMichael will be, like, it's just, you start to wonder about, how are these teams going to look going into training camp? And then as the 84 game season gets going, you start to wonder how many teams, because of all the changes, maybe have a little bit of a slower start. And is that an opportunity for some other teams that maybe had a little bit more continuity? We'll end up seeing, but it's certainly added some intrigue to what has already been kind of an interesting offseason as we get closer and closer to the shorter preseason, and on the regular season.
Yeah, I remember like the National Hockey season will start at the end of September. We have an 84 game regular season leading into the Stanley Cup playoffs. And you look at the St. Louis Blues now, Paulie, 4 first-round draft picks right now. It's hard to say if they're going to hold on to all of them. Who knows if they would trade Robert Thomas over the next little bit here. But I remember a certain team that had 3 first-round picks in a row in the 2015 draft, the Boston Bruins. And just because you have all those picks doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help you out if you decide to use all those picks out of the Boston Bruins.
Yeah, just off the top of my head, I don't think 2 of those guys panned out for the Boston Bruins. So, it certainly is some leverage, though. It certainly is capital that you can use at the draft if you're identifying a player that you want and that team that maybe wants to move that player is interested in getting something in the draft. So from St. Louis and the old home of Jordan Kyrou to Washington, the other intriguing part, and Jamie, when you were putting this together and asking us for some thoughts, I wrote down a few ideas of what's really hit me over the last week or so in the National Hockey League, and that was the Washington Capitals, where Jordan Kyrou is going to go. They gave up a pretty steep price to get Jordan Kyrou, with Connor McMichael going the other way, and a first-round draft pick, and another, player or prospect, whatever you want to call him. But then you also see that Washington goes out and signs Alex Tuck, right? He was the most sought after free agent in a very limited, unrestricted free agent market this year. I mean, he still had over 30 goals. So you wonder now, with Jordan Kyrou being there, Alex Tuck being there, does that entice Alex Ovechkin to play one more year in Washington, the greatest goal scorer in National Hockey League history? So that's something, the dominoes fall in one direction, but they might then spread out to other directions to see what happens and what the other moves are made when players like Ovi decide, well, maybe I'll play another year because we've got a pretty good team, or Washington's assembled some parts that I want to play with. So that's another part of this that I've been intrigued by, is what Washington has done. Certainly the collateral that St. Louis has gained, and there's been some other moves that have been made along the lines here. But the big free agent prize was Alex Tuck going to Washington shortly after the Capitals get Jordan Kyrou from St. Louis. And I guess, again, we'll see if Ovi signs for one more year.
Or is this obviously this is part of the succession plan too, of life without Alexander Ovechkin. But I agree with you, Paul. This has got to be something where you're saying, come back for one more year. This is what we have for you in Washington, not standing pat before the National Hockey League draft. All right. The Winnipeg Jets sit at number 8. Producer Zach, if you can throw up the question or the poll that will allow our viewers to take a part of. What do you think the Jets will do with the 8th overall selection? Will they trade to get a 2C or 2 winger, or a part of something else? Or do you just want them to make the pick? That's up to you. We'll play this game as we go along here. And Paul, so many things can happen at the 8th spot for the Winnipeg Jets. And it's really hard to pin down what exactly or who they'll pick, because you don't know what's going to break down in front of them. But there are some great names in the top 10. If you had to, what would you like to see fall to the Winnipeg Jets in that situation at 8th overall?
Okay, before we start throwing out names and what might happen, I mean, here's the scenarios. You could trade up.
Yeah.
You could pick at number 8 and stay put and stand pat. You could trade down, or you could trade the pick away, right? So there's options here before Friday night at whatever time, maybe 8 Central, somewhere around there, that Winnipeg would be stepping up to the podium. It's a pretty valuable pick, the way I look at it, guys, because this is the first time that Winnipeg's had a top 10 pick since Cole Perfetti in 2020. And from that standpoint, I mean, you lost Nikolai Ehlers, who was a high draft pick a number of years ago. You're looking at filling your funnel here. And that's why I think that this pick is very valuable to the Winnipeg Jets, especially where it is. The other part of that is, too, that I think that you're looking for a player when you pick in the top 10 that not only is going to be the best player available to you, but the best player available then can step in as soon as possible. And that's where the Jets are at. So what do you do with that pick? I think that it's a robust defensive core that really is available out here. this draft.
Yeah.
And with all of the defensemen, are you looking at that? That would be one of the areas that the Jets are looking at strengthening, particularly on the right side. As somebody said to me recently, you can never have enough defensemen at the NHL level, which then trickles down to your farm team in the American Hockey League. So that's one feeling on where they would go. The other part is, okay, everybody knows they would like to get a 2 center and a 2C center that comes in and has the ability to step in fairly soon. Well, that's available in this draft as well. I think, as you mentioned, Jamie, and not to get away from specifics on this,
Right.
it's how the draft unfolds in the first 7 picks will then determine what the Jets take.
Yeah.
And if there's a number of defensemen, and as I mentioned, it's a pretty stock full draft in the first 7 or so picks, 10 picks of defensemen, well, maybe there's somebody that's not left there that's going to force you now or willingly taking a 2C center. If a couple of centers go that you've identified as guys that are high on your list, well, maybe now you're going to take the next best thing, which would be one of the defensemen. So it will really be determined on what goes in front of them, what goes before them. And as we know, outside of the first 3 picks, it can be a little unpredictable. But there's a lot of names out there, and I think Winnipeg, either way, if they hang on to the 8th pick overall, is going to get a very good player.
Mitch, you want to make a case for Viggo Bjork, the kid from Sweden who had played at the World Hockey Championships on Sweden's top line. And I'll tell you something, Sweden's got a lot of great young players going on right now. And we think about the World Junior team that could be the favorite for gold medal again at the World Hockey Championships. But just tell us a little bit about why you think Viggo Bjork, should he be there, be great for the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah, and I mean, to echo what Paul Edmonds just talked about, I mean, there's so many possibilities. I remember being at a number of drafts and asking Kevin Cheveldayoff kind of like versions of this same question about, hey, you're picking at X overall. Let's take, the year that we kind of talked about where Boston had 3 picks and then it was Winnipeg. They chose Kyle Connor. I remember asking him, how many scenarios do you put together to try to figure out where things might be? And he just kind of said, there's plenty, but at the same time, there's a reason that you have your list and everybody's had their contributions to the list leading into that first round, so that no matter what happens in front of you, you take who you deem is the best player available and you add that player to your organization. And more often than not, and I mean, how many times have we heard Winnipeg be very thrilled with who they've been able to add in that first round? So yeah, there's possibilities. There could be a run on centers like Paul talked about, and then you end up picking one of those very valuable defensemen, or it goes the other way. If it does go the other way, I've done a lot of reading on Viggo Bjork. And the interesting thing, of course, Winnipeg doesn't allow us in their scouting meetings. So this is a purely just me looking at numbers, watching video, all that kind of stuff. And I think back to the Stanley Cup final this year in game number 2. And so much of the storyline was, how will Carolina's forwards, of course they have speed, be able to get inside or make plays against a big defensive core in Vegas, right? Like, those are 2 assets that you love to have regardless of how that Stanley Cup final ended up. Lots of speed up front, and of course some size on your back end is never a bad thing. It's just a matter of who's going to win that battle on that particular day. And I think back to game number 2 when Logan Stankoven wins that one-on-one below the goal line, and at that point Vegas is up, I think it was 2-0 in that game. Stankoven scores there. That's a smaller player getting that puck from the bigger player, ends up kind of turning the tide, especially in game number 2. So there's been a lot of conversation around Viggo Bjork's size in and around that 5'10" kind of area, depending where you read. You might even see 5'9". But he was talking at the top prospect media availability in Buffalo the other day, and he was asked about his competitiveness. And whether it's him talking about the fact that he's comfortable doing it, it's kind of part of the identity of the club team that he plays on in Sweden. He's comfortable. It's part of his identity as a player, is that competitiveness on the puck. And even the National Hockey League's own director of European scouting said, from everything that I've seen, whether it's playing at the SHL level or in those tournaments like he talked about, especially the Worlds, which he played in for Sweden and had some success there as well. And, even Sidney Crosby was asked about him. It just seems that he's able to find a way to, and the quote that the director of European scouting used, he's a guy that can survive everywhere he goes. Now, of course, he's going to want to thrive on top of that as well.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I mean, you think of the competitiveness that he would bring to the table. He's got some offensive capability as well. And of course had some success, like you mentioned, with Sweden on the international level. So, I mean, it would be cool to be able to add him in, but of course there's so many different ways that this draft can go. And if you end up with one of those defensemen as well, oh shoot, you've brought a high-end defenseman into your organization. That's never a bad thing, as Paul referenced.
JT, if
Yes.
I may,
Yeah, of
just
course.
to piggyback on what Mitchell was talking about, Vigo Bjork is highly sought after, and one thing that I read that was interesting is if he was 6'1",
Mm-hmm.
this guy would be right up there as maybe being considered to be taken first overall. That's the skill set that this guy has. The compete is what jumps off the page. The offensive skill set, the mindfulness on the defensive side, the motor doesn't stop with this kid. So he tore up the U20. As Mitchell said, there was no
Yeah.
problem in jumping up into the men's league, at the SHL level. Between he and Ivar Stenberg, they were the two players that really willed Sweden on to a U20 gold medal championship at the World Championships, or pardon me, at the World Junior Championships, right? Like, there's a lot to like about this kid, and there's a lot of teams that do like him. Where he goes depends on what list you look at. Some have him in the top 8, some have him in the top 12. It will be determined when you get to the draft on where different teams have him slotted. But he might be a real good pick for the Winnipeg Jets, just based on the fact that there's a lot of boxes that he ticks. And maybe what we can do is just forget about the size for a minute here,
Right.
based on 5'9", 5'10", as Mitch mentioned, and just look at the player overall. Because if you could skate, and we've seen that, and Logan Stankoven was mentioned by Mitch, Seth Jarvis, another guy.
Yeah.
If you can get inside and skate, and you have the will to compete, and you are not afraid, you can have a lot of success in the National Hockey League, the way the rules are built around the game now.
We're going to talk about Manitoba's 5 players on Central Scouting's list a little bit later in this broadcast. But I want to talk about, the Jets for the longest time. The 2015 draft was their gold rush, right? That was something they held their hat on for a while. I want to talk about the 2022 draft and how it's starting to work out for this hockey club right now. And of course, McGroarty goes in the first round, but they turn that into Brayden Yager, Brad Lambert, Leah Salamonson, Danny Zhilkin, Brown, Wagner, and DiVincentis in the 7th round. This could be one of the Jets' best drafts in a long time, and we're starting to see the fruits of that labor. Just a quick thought on how well this is turning out for the Jets, Paulie.
Well, you certainly have some players that have pushed in, I mean, Yager, I think, got his feet wet last year. Salamonson, we've been talking about him coming over, and it was only a matter of time before he got into the NHL level. And he certainly, when he got there this year, there was no looking back. It was unfortunate that he got hurt. I mean, the list goes on with these guys. Brad Lambert, I think, there's still a little bit more for him to give, but the best thing for Brad Lambert last year was he was brought up with some games still to play in a chunk of the schedule, and they said to him, Brad, go and play. You're not going back down. And he was able to show us some glimpses of what he can do with the puck. And I think that this is where he needs to get better. There's the skill set, the skating ability. The one thing I'll be interested to see is if he got a little stronger this offseason and going into camp, because he wasn't afraid to go into the corners to try to battle for the puck, but he was maneuvered off the puck a little bit too easy at times. So, a little bit more strength. DiVincentis got an opportunity to watch him basically take the net in the Moose playoffs and the 5 games that they played at home. And, he's another guy, along with Thomas Milic for that matter. I mean, a little bit more seasoning, some marination in the American Hockey League is not going to hurt. But that was a stellar draft for the Winnipeg Jets, with the players that have moved up and to the top of the depth chart, really, at their logistic positions here. And I think that guys that the organization are looking at that are not too far away from stepping in, if not already, to NHL full-time positions.
Mitch?
Yeah, and I mean, I think, and Paul referenced, being able to see some of the American Hockey League playoffs and the performance of DiVincentis in that. I mean, that was phenomenal. Like, and it's not like the series against Milwaukee or the start of the series against Grand Rapids was particularly high scoring. So it's not like DiVincentis had a whole lot of room for any sort of errors, and he was very stellar for Manitoba in that postseason. So that's the kind of growth that you like to see. And speaking of that postseason, I mean, talk about like exactly the experience that if you're the Winnipeg Jets, you want for your prospects to be able to step into those kind of high pressure situations at the pro level. And Braden Yager playing up the middle, and I had a big assist, I believe, on one of the game-winning goals against Milwaukee that led to I believe it was David Gustafson on the deflection in game 2. And at that point, Manitoba was facing elimination, and those are the types of guys making plays for you. Like that's immense for them. And I think about the step forward that Danny Zhilkin took this year, career highs in terms of his production with the Manitoba Moose. But also what stood out to me, and I know, Paul, you and I talked about this both on and off air, just the pace that Danny Zhilkin was able to play with and the confidence that he had. And of course, there's growth that has to happen for him as well. But you just felt that Danny Zhilkin needed to take that step to kind of push himself forward, push himself up that depth chart, show that he's making those strides at the pro level. And that's exactly what he did last season. So I think you referenced that 2022 class, and Paul touched on Elias Salamonson and what he was able to do this season, got into a bunch of games. And the fact that, your Salamonsons, Zhilkin, Yager got themselves into some of those NHL games, especially as the season was coming to an end, and you're kind of joining that postseason push that Winnipeg was trying to make. That's not a small thing either for those players. So they're obviously going to take that, I would imagine, as motivation to go into their off-season training and come back and try to build on some of those experiences that they had last season.
Both you got a good look at Garrett Brown, right? Like he was a fourth round pick just from that draft. It was a short time he was here with the Manitoba Moose, but for him to step into pro hockey at the highest level in the postseason after winning a couple of championships at the University of Denver says a lot about how good of a player he could be down the road here.
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching him play, and it's interesting. And I know sometimes when these guys have decided to come out of college or they're graduating or aged out, that they're a little bit older than your 18-year-old that's just out of a major junior or drafted and trying to push into the lineup. But he skated like he was not nervous, and that was the one skill set that jumped out at me was Garrett Brown's ability to skate and move the puck and jump up. So a bigger body as well, right-hand shot defenseman. So, there's a lot to like about that as well. And he was in that draft. So it's good that Winnipeg got him signed, that they got him out of Denver. It comes from championship pedigree in that program. And let's not forget that when you've been around success, you understand how to win, and that can be parlayed as you move your way up. And maybe that's why he played with the confidence. Now, Mitch, he didn't get a point in the games that he played with the Manitoba Moose, certainly in the playoffs and their Calder Cup run. But at the same time, he was noticeable. So not every defenseman is going to go out and have a point per game, debut or certainly lead their team in scoring. Some do, some don't. But what you want to see is some confidence and some poise. And I think we certainly saw that in a short sample size from Brown when he came up with the Manitoba Moose and played in the playoffs.
Yeah, right. Could make that first pass, right? And how many times do you hear coaches, whether it's one specifically working with defensemen, head coaches, or even teammates, talk about the importance of a defenseman being able to do that. And I found the first couple shifts, of course, like you mentioned, he was maybe a little bit nervous, but he settled in very well, started using his feet, using his size, winning those battles, especially below the goal line in Manitoba's zone, and then making that first pass so Manitoba didn't have to spend as much time defending and they were able to get up ice. So as far as debuts go, and you talk about the challenge of making your pro debut, let alone making that debut in the American Hockey League playoffs, it was a big challenge, but Garrett Brown was certainly up for it.
Well, speaking of Manitoba, the Central Scouting list came out, obviously, about the final list, obviously, of North American skaters came out in April, and there were 5 Manitobans on it. So producer Zach, if you can throw up that board here a little bit. The big fish in terms of Manitoba-born skaters at the NHL Draft this year is Carson Karls, the Cypress River. From the Prince George Cougars, the Western Hockey League, then it's Breck Liskey, from the Everett Silvertips, who went all the way to the Memorial Cup, won the Western Hockey League Championship. Zachary Lansard, Jonas Wu, and then Nathan Brown rounding things out from Medicine Hat and Portland, respectively. Mitch, Carson Karls recently made a comment about how he's a farm kid, doesn't like the big cities. And I'm sure that had lots of people here in Manitoba all excited about, okay, this is the right place. Winnipeg, small place, nice and quiet. But it is no chance that Carson Karls will find himself dropping to number 8, considering how great of a defenseman he is. And the sky is only the limit for this kid.
Yeah, ranked 3rd North American skater. And I mean, that's had a great season in Prince George with those 73 points that you see there and 53 assists. I mean, that tells me he can make plays, whether that's get pucks through at the point or, be able to create as well. And committed to, University of North Dakota. I thought it was interesting. I don't believe he's even going to the draft because you talked about that rural Manitoba. He's got chores to do.
Right.
Mad respect, because I'm a guy that would probably try to get out of said chores, but sounds like it's all hands on deck at the farm at that point. And everything you read about him too, to go along with the point production, tons of bite defensively as well. So that means can be difficult to play against. And that's exactly what you want, especially at his size at 6'2", roughly at around 200 pounds. You want to be able to use that size as an asset. We just talked about Garrett Brown being able to do that type of thing, use his size to be able to win some battles, because how often in the defensive zone do you talk about kill plays and being able to stop the offensive zone possession against, so that you're not spending your whole shift defensively. And, Carson as well seems like a guy that can be able to get up in that play as well. It can run a power play. Just one of those guys that you would consider a two-way defenseman. There's so much to like, and that's why, he's ranked as high as he is.
I spoke with Nathan Brown, who was from the city of Winnipeg, and he says he goes up against Carson Karls the last 2 years because all the Manitobans know one another. They skate together in the summer, and he said when you go up against Carson Karls, even in the summertime, he makes you pay in front of the net. He goes, a couple of times I had to look back at him and say, hey, take it easy on me. This is the type of competitor and player that Carson Karls is. And I see in the chat, we all understand Carson Karls will not be a Winnipeg Jet, but to respect the fact of a great Manitoba kid will be going up likely in the top 5 of the draft. Then you think about the guys below that. Brett Liskey, Paulie, small town. And all 5 of these guys said they are not going to the draft. They're all going to be at home with family, which I think, a lot of us don't like the decentralized draft, but it gives the kids an option to be at home with friends and family. Brett Liskey, another one of those kids, but a strong defenseman, Paulie, that you got to love.
Yeah, first, just back to Carson Karls for a second. And this is great for Manitoba hockey overall, because you're going to have a first rounder taken in consecutive years here that calls Manitoba home. And Carter Bear was that guy last year. And he was taken 13th overall by Detroit and had a great year with Everett as well. So from that standpoint, I think hockey here at the elite level in Manitoba is alive and well. And Carson Karls is a good two-way defender with that mean streak that Mitchell was talking about. Brett Liskey's a similar type player that way, just maybe not with the punishing finish that Carson Karls has, but a puck-moving, offensively skilled, defensively responsible defenseman at the Western Hockey League level. And I think anytime, and we talked about that championship pedigree, anytime that you can win at any level, it's going to help you as you move up. And he certainly experienced that with Everett. What I liked about the fact that Brett Liskey, who left home when he was 14 years old and moved out to Alberta and played at high levels out there, still comes back to the Beausejour, Oakbank, Eastman area for the summer. But he's been well traveled, and he knows what it takes certainly to move around and pursue his career. But the one thing that was really interesting is if you look at the playoff numbers for him, he had 17 points in 18 playoff games. That jumps out for me. Like, I look at a lot of stats, and I look at a lot of amateur stats, and then you try to make these projections. If I'm a scout, and if I'm looking at building my team, and if that's junior A, major junior, and of course, Brett Liskey is getting past that because he's already in the Western Hockey League, but then to extrapolate that maybe to some sort of professional aspect, Yeah, the regular season is great, and you want to see guys put up points and offensive numbers, especially defensemen. Assists are big because that means that you're making that first pass and making a play or quarterbacking, certainly on the power play. But what do you do in the playoffs? And if you're a point per game guy from the blue line in the playoffs, that means that you take your game to another level when it's the most important time of year. And Brett Liskey did that this year. So while Carson Karls is going to be a blue chip first rounder and probably in the top 10 and maybe in the top 5, I think Brett Liskey could find himself in the second round here, and I wouldn't be surprised if he does.
Zachary Lancer, Paulie from St. Anne.
Yeah, another Eastman kid, and this guy in Zach Lansard has really progressed well in Regina. You look at the point total as a forward from year one as a 16-year-old to year two as a 17-year-old, and you see a market jump, certainly where he was. And that's great because that means that he got his feet underneath him. That means that he paid his dues as a 16-year-old in a very tough league to come in as a first-year player at 16. You're moving away from home. You're going to a different high school, and you get all of those things settled, and then you see the progression into the second year. And I'm sure the Regina Pats are elated with what they saw from Zach Lansard. Friends with Brett Liskey too. They grew up, and like you said, they all know each other. All of these guys, but another kid that can probably find himself because of his compete as well, and the offensive skill that he has and the skating ability in Zach Lansard. And I heard about Zach a number of years ago when he was 13 years old. In fact, I was coaching a AAA spring team, and we tried to recruit him. The problem was that he was interested in coming, but he had about 14 other teams to choose from,
Yeah.
and so he went there. But and we never got him, and which is understandable. But at that time, you start to hear about these kids' names, and you're not surprised when you're hearing about names at 12 and 13 years old that these kids are projected to get to bigger and better, and that's where Zach Lansard is. And I just like the progression, as I mentioned a couple times, in what he did from year one as a 16-year-old to a 17-year-old. And here's the thing that I'll say about Zach Lansard, and for a lot of other players that you see that progression. He's 17 years old. He's going to turn 18 this summer. That doesn't mean that progression isn't going to continue. So if you draft him in the third or fourth round, wherever you have him slotted in, that could be a real nice find for you as he continues to progress and build on certainly getting better as a major junior and then professional hockey player.
Before we go back to Paulie for the last two of the Manitoba-born prospects for this NHL draft, Mitchell, you look at Lane Hudson. Last year's NHL draft, not a single defenseman was drafted under 6 feet tall. Jonas Wu finds himself in that department. Does the success of Lane Hudson allow someone like Jonas Wu and scouts and NHL teams to go, okay, maybe we can draft a smaller type defenseman?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it kind of comes down to something similar that we talked about earlier with Vio Bjork, right? You have to be able to have that compete and show that you're not afraid of trying to make a play or doing what's necessary to make a play. And then you have to show the durability. The thing with Lane Hudson that you always hear, and, we're able to see at least twice a season when Winnipeg takes on the Montreal Canadiens, is that elusive ability to skate. And I mean, for Lane Hudson, that's a big, huge asset for him as well. So usually, you would love your back end to be huge and towering, but that's not the only way to get it done. And if you're a defenseman that can A, compete, B, make sure that the front of the net stays clear, you're tough to play against, and if you can skate and get up in the play, make that first pass like we talk about, there's a lot of things that can go your way as a smaller defenseman. Sometimes you're able to get away from checks in your own zone where you're maybe about to be pinned against the boards. You have to be able to move and know how to use your body effectively. It's not always a huge body check that's going to get it done. Sometimes it's simply just getting in on the hands. And, this isn't to say that Josh Morrissey is small by any stretch, but how many times do you see Josh Morrissey get in on the hands of opponents and all of a sudden, boom, he's got 2 feet of space to be able to work with because A, he can skate, B, he knows how to position his body, and C, he just has that maneuverability and that elusive ability, if you will, to be able to get away from those checks. So the other thing that you want to see if you're a defenseman that's a little bit on the smaller side is durability. That's always going to be the big thing. But I mean, ultimately, we've seen smaller defensemen be able to handle things at the National Hockey League level. It's so much more pace in the game over the last number of years. Yes, there's still that physicality, but at the same time, it's shown over the course of the last number of years, and especially with Lane Hutson, like you mentioned, you can be quote unquote undersized. One of the great quotes that I've heard, and I believe it was Ray Ferraro that said it, and he heard it from someone else. It's, are you small or are you short? And if you're small, sometimes it doesn't work. But if you're short, but you have that competitive ability, usually you can find your way in this league.
Jonas Wu, of course, his older brother Jet was drafted in the National Hockey League. Jonas, of course, says his idol is his brother. A little bit of an age gap, has learned everything he has from him. But what a year that Jonas had with the Medicine Hat Tigers. And should his professional career not start earlier, next year he will go to Arizona State at the NCAA next season.
Yeah, what a place, right? What a place. Let's go to Phoenix. I'm going to play college hockey in Phoenix, right?
In an NHL arena too. So
well, that's debatable. We did games there, so we know.
Yes.
Look, there's been a real good lineage here with Jonas, and his dad played, and that's Larry, and Larry coaches the U18 AAA Winnipeg Bruins, and has had a lot of success as a coach, and runs the Laker Hockey Academy, and has been involved with the Churchill High School program, and the list goes on. And Larry played in Major Junior in Swift Current in Regina, and then on to be a firefighter, and then also he had some time at the University of Manitoba as a Bison. So he's pumped out two pretty good hockey players in Jet, former Vancouver Canuck prospect and farmhand, spent a lot of years with Abbotsford, and is now finished last year with the San Jose Barracuda and the San Jose Sharks system. And then, of course, Jonas talking about his brother being his idol. Look, we've been watching Jonas since he was 15 years old, playing for the Winnipeg Ice and that call-up situation. And yeah, while we would determine that he would be undersized at 5'9", of the five Manitobans that we are going to talk about, and there are other Manitobans that are draft eligible. We've just selected these five.
Yeah.
Jonas Wu is the most dynamic of all of the five. I mean, this kid is slippery. 4 years in the Western Hockey League. Started, back when he was 15 years old, playing some time with the hometown team in the Ice before going on slightly with Wenatchee, and then winning a title in Medicine Hat, and now going on to ASU. I mean, he had over 80 points. He scored almost 30 goals. The numbers just keep going up, and he's tough, and he plays a lot bigger than 5'9", and knowing the family, you understand why. Probably, Jet beat him up a little bit growing up. I wouldn't be surprised. So he had to defend himself at an early age. But if you're looking at we talked about Lane Hutson, and Mitchell gave you a great description of what makes him a real good defenseman that's well under 6 feet. Jared Spurgeon's another one of those guys, certainly has been plying his trade in Minnesota. There's room for those players. And Jonas Wu, I think, has some room to maneuver to get up to that because he skates so well. He can make a play. He's very quick. He's elusive, slippery, as I mentioned. The cutback ability that he has, the opportunities that he makes space for himself in stick handling out of tight spots. He can win battles. That's the other thing, too. Back on retrieves, he's going to come away with a puck. Into the corner, he's going to come away with a puck. And if you have a guy, regardless of his size, that can do that by getting in on hands, winning those puck battles, using his size and leverage and the ability to get in and be a little bit more cunning on how you're going to come away off the wall and take a puck off somebody's stick, then when you make that first pass or that play after that, that's where you're really noticeable, and that's for Jonas Wu. He's a package for sure when it comes to offensive ability. From the blue line, we'll see what he does at ASU, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody took a chance on Jonas Wu in the late rounds.
Nathan Brown, last one before we get going here, Paulie. He was in the BC Hockey League, kind of that super league that merged with the good teams in Alberta. Left there, went to Portland, loved his time there. what's the outlook for him and how much he's grown over the last couple of years?
Well, two things. Jonas Wu and Nathan Brown are both 2006s, so they've been through the draft before, right?
Yeah. Yes.
For Jonas Wu, he has a November birthday, so he wasn't eligible when all of his peers were eligible, right? It's that September 15th deadline, and if you were born after that, you go into the next year, regardless of all of your friends that were born pre-September 15th. So, both those two players that we're talking about, Jonas Wu and Nathan Brown, have been through this before. Nathan Brown starts in Junior A, starts in Niverville. Congratulations, by the way,
Yes.
to Niverville on their Centennial Cup championship. That's just outstanding for Manitoba, as we've talked about Manitoba hockey. And then Nathan moved along. And here's a guy that comes out of Junior A. Next thing you know, he's a top 6 forward playing with the Portland Winterhawks. And then, strangely enough, not drafted, gets an opportunity to play with Belleville in one game in the American Hockey League this year, puts up 7 minutes of penalties in the one game, gets into a fight, and I think now turns some heads and saying, I can put up points, I can defend myself, I can play even at 6 feet that power forward role.
Yeah.
So once again, we talk about that progression that these players are trying to make as they're moving up. And you go from Junior A to Major Junior to one game in the American Hockey League to maybe somebody taking a chance on you in the 6th or 7th round, and then having the opportunity just to get into somebody's system. I've told this story before. Ben Sherratt, former Winnipeg Jet, Detroit Red Wing, talked to him one time about being drafted by the Atlanta Thrashers before they moved to Winnipeg. And he said, I get drafted, I look in the depth chart, I'm like 18th. And I'm thinking, I'm never going to get there. I'm never going to get there. And you know what? He's carved out a pretty good career. So I think if you're looking for something to motivate you by saying, okay, I'm a 6th or 7th draft pick, I'm really happy getting into somebody's system. But it really starts, that's the jumping off point for you. And Nathan Brown, I think, like a lot of these other guys, will have that opportunity if they get drafted, because the progression is certainly there and it's going up. They're on departures, not arrivals.
Well said, my friend. And thank you so much for your knowledge of course, the Manitoba-born players in the Central Scouting List. Gentlemen, appreciate your time. I'll be back. I'm going to try and recruit one of you or both of you for the post-game show after the second round of the the National Hockey League Draft. Just thought I'd let you know. We'll get to that in a second after we get off this conversation, this show. But appreciate your time. I thank everybody for taking part. I believe the consensus is they want Kevin Cheveldayoff to make the pick at 8. Who that player turns out to be and what happens. There it is. 92% of you decide that they want Kevin Cheveldayoff to make that pick Friday night in Buffalo. We appreciate your time. I appreciate the two gentlemen in front beside me, their time as well. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.